Hello, trauma warriors. I'm Janae with Defeating Childhood Trauma, and today marks the final installment in our ongoing series on coercive control. As we've moved through the stages, we've also talked about the science. Stage one, love bombing, that whirlwind courtship that gets the victim hooked so that they put up with all of the mess that the abuser starts pulling in stage two when they slip off the mask. And that's intermittent reinforcement, also known as breadcrumbing, gaslighting, isolating the victim, and controlling and monopolizing their time. Then stage three, fear, shame, and destroyed identity. The science behind why we're always seeing the victim leave and then go back to their abuser. It's because of the activated attachment system that happens in a trauma bond, and it's literally an addiction. They're having withdrawals and they just don't know it. And they lose confidence in their ability to manage without their abuser every time they take their abuser back, every time they give in to the withdrawals. And now, stage four, the final stage of coercive control. The body gives the victim an ultimatum. And if the victim does not listen to their body, then they are going to slip into the point of no return. No return to who they once were before the abuser, or even worse, as we will see. I will begin reading the final sections of my article. Coercive control is the reason they can't just leave. Link to the full article is in the description. Stage four, murder, suicide, or soul death. And this section opens up with an excerpt from Trauma Glossary 1. Soul murder, the act of committing spiritual annihilation on a person through an extended period of emotional abuse, neglect, gaslighting, and control, to slowly erode one's joy, self-esteem, and sense of identity, while ultimately confusing one's victim to bond with their spiritual predator for emotional validation and needs. This is the stage where it is too late for the victim. Murder or suicide is how the victim loses their physical life. Another way that the victim can lose their life is all the medical problems this type of abuse causes, even without physical abuse. While I have not covered what happens to them medically, choosing to talk instead about the science in their psychology, I do have an article for you at the end that addresses both. The body begins to reject the abuser, and the primary tell is when the medical problems with too high or deficient cortisol intensifies. Rapid weight loss is a sign of deficient cortisol. So are autoimmune disorders, chronic fatigue, and digestion problems like irritable bowel syndrome and acid reflux. High cortisol means the body has shifted from learned helplessness into fight or flight. Weight gain is a major symptom of high cortisol. So is high blood pressure, diabetes, and cancer. This tends to happen after years of living in coercive control. The victim has endured every type of abuse and is eroding psychologically into nothing. The body is trying to signal to the victim, it's time to escape, if not physically, then by death. If the victim does not know how to listen to and obey their body, complete soul death occurs. The victim shuts down psychologically and will not know how to function without their abuser. Even in the rare case that they outlive their abuser, the victim cannot recover their old self because the soul has been murdered past the point of return. Okay, Now, let's hear this applied in action from an actual survivor of all four stages of coercive control. I'm going to read you a small excerpt from the interview I published with Taylor, Escaping Coercive Control, an interview with a survivor, and the link to that full article will be in the description too. In Taylor's own words, I started a spiritual journey in 2011, and it was the reason my body started acting up. Committing yourself to growing and healing, but staying with your abuser go against each other. I got really skinny. We figured it was an autoimmune of some sort, but didn't know what kind. I did so many tests and got no answers. When I decided to start working on my growth and healing, my body decided it was going to get me away so I could. I just didn't realize what was happening until after I left him, and I rapidly started improving. So, here, Taylor gives us a date, 2011. And what's interesting is she wouldn't leave her abuser until 2015. So, this is 4 years of this extreme weight loss and multiple tests with no answers. And on one hand, we can say, oh, when the body gives you an ultimatum, you also have a grace period. Because, hey, she was like this for 4 years and she has lived to tell. So, yes, we can say that there is a grace period when the body starts giving us the ultimatum saying, okay, we've been doing this for too long. We can't hold out much longer. What are you going to do about it before you spiral into complete and irrevocable soul death? But more important than that is the fact that she spent 4 years getting all these tests with no answers. It's obvious there's something wrong, but all the medical professionals are, scratching their head, going, I don't know. And it seems to me that there is a major breakdown in communication between the medical physicians and trauma informed psychology. Because with trauma informed psychology, it's understanding the science behind trauma. It's knowing how cortisol is going to respond to trauma and domestic abuse and all of the other body chemicals that are also responding to this abusive relationship. Meanwhile, physicians know the biological signs of low or high cortisol. And I think the key to connecting the dots is understanding maybe just one little word suggested between both parties, like domestic abuse syndrome. When you're seeing these weird things that are happening to the patient, this sudden unhealthy weight loss or sudden unhealthy weight gain, it's cortisol. If there's just that understanding of the word itself, and then perhaps giving that patient an online test to take. There are tests today that you can take to find out if you are in an abusive relationship. Because the victim of coercive control, as crazy as it sounds, they don't know they're being abused. But when they take that online test and find out how high they score, they tend to get a very painful but necessary light bulb. Just something as simple as the physician saying, we don't usually see these types of mysterious illnesses unless the person is living in a psychologically abusive home. Could you take this online test so that we can maybe eliminate that as a possible cause? I think that would be so helpful in getting these victims to wake up sooner, escape sooner, and start healing. Because, in Taylor's own words, Her weight returned to normal as soon as she finally separated from her abuser. So there's the treatment plan for these weird ailments that medical physicians can't name. If we could just have some small amount of communication between trauma informed psychology and physicians, how many people could be saved? And I am not slamming doctors by any means. All I am suggesting is that there's a breakdown in communication here that could be solved if we kind of bridge that little gap. All right. Now for the next section on the article I wrote on coercive control. The whittling down effect. Many adult survivors of having only one cluster B parent grew up witnessing what happened to the other parent who chose to stay. They talk about the whittling down effect it had on the battered parent, even when the abuse was non physical. And I count myself among them because I witnessed this whittling down effect on my father as day by day and year after year, he was slowly losing more of himself. And now, or so I have heard, having been no contact since 2009, after surviving 2 cancer diagnoses, he has an obnoxious beer gut, even though he doesn't drink. He no longer responds to my borderline mother's daily rages. He only frowns and grunts. It is too late for my father because he can no longer function without his abuser. It is also worth mentioning that we tend to call that parent the enabler parent, also in Trauma Glossary 1. However, I also know that not all victims of domestic violence make the same choices that the enabler parent makes. That's why the definition of the enabler parent also comes with a disclaimer. On this site, I stand with children first and adult survivors of childhood trauma. I also stand with battered spouses, but I will not stand with enabler parents. No amount of abuse or trauma excuses enabling the abuser to hurt the children. I'm going to pause here and walk you through what I grew up witnessing. As I said before, I was born 1 year after my parents were married. My mother, borderline personality disorder, and my father would become the enabler parent. So you could certainly say that my father was already in stage 2 of coercive control by the time I was born. Intermittent reinforcement, gaslighting, isolating the victim, and enmeshment, which is basically controlling and monopolizing all their time. My earliest memory is hearing my father holler as my mother's raging and attacking him. I recall growing up, watching her throwing punches, even kicks at my father, and the look in his eyes of so much helplessness as he's trying to dodge her, knowing he had no choice because if he put up his hands to defend himself, he would be the one going to jail for domestic violence. While on the other hand, well, who is he going to confide into without looking like a wimp? Age 9, something happened. My father got so fed up with my mother hitting him all the time that he told her he wanted her gone from the house. Now, they had talked about separating or divorcing numerous times before this. And spoiler alert, no matter how many times they talked about it before this night or after, no one ever actually left the house. They always stayed together and it was always talk. But on this one particular night, it must have really scared my borderline mother because she stopped hitting him after that. But what my father wasn't seeing was that while she removed that one type of abuse from the equation, she was also doubling down on the psychological abuse. Another thing that started to happen after that night, that she got scared into not hitting my father ever again. She started escalating her so called discipline of me into full blown beatings. So, yes, from age 9 and up, I became the new punching bag for my mother. Age 12. This is a very interesting time. By now, he's married to his abuser for 13 years. I remember once going grocery shopping with my father, leaving my borderline mother at home. She had done one of her daily rages on him, not physical, but lots of shouting and paranoid jealousy because she was always paranoid jealous of him cheating on her with one of his female coworkers. Anyway, just having enough. Us going to the store together, he just needed to vent in the car and he said, "It's always her way. Everything is about her. She's always got to be right." And at the time, I had no idea what to say to any of this. But it's evidence that he still had a little fight in him. He was just frustrated and unsure what to do. Well, another time, after I got sick of her beating me every day while my father was driving me to school, still age 12, I told him that I was going to talk to the guidance counselor about what my mother was doing. And I remember my father sounded so sad and defeated. He said, "I wish I could get some counseling. I don't know what to do." Well, flash forward to 1 year later, just 1 year. I'm complaining to my father about my mother's mistreatment of me, and he looks at me deadpan and said, "The reason you two don't get along is because you're just alike. You're getting more like her every day." He watched her beat me again and again, and he did absolutely nothing. In fact, he would victim shame me after every beating. It was my fault because, God forbid, I talked back when she was baiting me by assassinating my character. I was not going to absorb her character assassinations. And for that, I was told it was my fault she beat me. I should have gone along with her. And another thing, it gets even better. My only defense up until I was 17 years old was to throw up my forearms to block the blows that she was raining on me. My mother called that, "Don't fight me when I'm trying to hit you." My father would later on interpret what he witnessed as, "Well, when y'all were fighting earlier." And all I could think was, last time I checked, a fight is defined by two people exchanging blows. But this is where you officially see stage three, the destroyed identity. My father, 14 years now married to his abuser. His identity becomes destroyed, and his mind is now open more than normal to absorbing his abuser's perspective. And that's when they start the psychological merging. So, my father, by this point, is seeing the world through his abuser's eyes. 20 years after this, stage four happens. His first cancer diagnosis. They caught it early enough to get rid of it. Then it came back in 2020, or so I've heard. It came back, but the doctors cleared it up again. And now here we are today, where he has been 51 years married to his abuser, and all he does now is frown and grunt. There have been those over the years who have made jokes about my father, that when my mother says jump, he says, how high? Well, of course he does. He's been her walking marionette for years. Why do you think I've been making all these marionette covers for my videos and the podcast? Because that's what it's like when you're living in coercive control. The abuser's controlling their puppet, and we just can't see it because we can't see the science. And by the way, it is not funny. I would never make a joke like that on anyone who has endured every type of abuse for so long that they have become nothing more than a shell of who they once were. And who they once were can't ever even come back. There's nothing funny about that. Now, with all of that said, I want to take a moment to address the adult children of this type of parental unit, the abuser and the enabler parent. It's okay to have complicated feelings towards your parents, especially the enabler. It's okay to feel compassion for all of the abuse you witnessed your enabler parent endure, and to also hold them accountable for their betrayal as a parent, for their failure at being a true parent to you. It's okay to feel both. For myself, it makes me sad, very sad, when I think of my father who is still in that situation and it has gotten so bad that he is completely shut down as a human being. And the fact that he is my father only makes it more personal. But at the same time, he made the choice to start telling me from age 13 and up on repeat that I was getting more like my mother every day. And I carried that information with me as a belief up until I was almost 45. That means I carried that information for nearly 32 years, believing that I had evil in my core and I must overcompensate by self abandonment. I have forgiven myself for 32 years of self betrayal, but I won't forgive him for his betrayal of me. For myself, I see it as I have two choices. I can sit around and cry every day over a man I cannot save because it's too late. Or I can redirect my energy towards those I can help, those who want to be saved, those who still have hope for living a fulfilling life after coercive control. So I share my father's story as a means of helping and encouraging others, warning them of how much worse it will get if they stay in these types of relationships. Now, on that note, let's read the next section of my article on coercive control. How we can help the domestic violence victim. Validate them without judgment. Even though we want the victim to leave, we must also be aware of the process it takes for them to do so. When the victim is ready to open up, they will remember the one who never said, just leave. And that's the person they will open up to. Bear in mind another extraordinary fact. Many victims of coercive control don't understand they are being abused. But anyone who watched the R. Kelly documentaries also know that his wife had to take a test similar to this one to find out if she was being abused. And the link to that online test is embedded in the article. The domestic violence victim carries lots of shame, both about themselves and all the abuses that are going on. The victim has been programmed into protecting their abuser. So be aware that what they share might be just the tip of the iceberg. Never, ever underestimate the malicious intent of this type of abuser when faced with the threat of losing their personal property. Anyone evil enough to commit coercive control is capable of murder, regardless of having no history of physical violence. It is in the victim's best interest to not just leave, but to strategize a safe exit plan. And they must be sure the abuser doesn't suspect a thing. Then, once they escape, there's the withdrawals of that lethal drug known as trauma bond they must work through. Making a list of all the abuses they suffered while under their abuser's control can help bring clarity during those manic spikes of high dopamine. I know it doesn't sound like much, but I've seen how these lists have helped other victims break the trauma bond. Now I'm going to read you a little extra from my interview with Taylor because she provides one more clue on what the victim might be interested in doing to successfully stay away from their abuser once they leave. Just just a little context. The year is now 2015, finally, and they are in the process of selling their farm and moving 8 hours away to live with her abuser's family. So he drops her off at the bus stop so that she could go back to the farm to start wrapping things up and getting it ready to sell by January 2016. And what divine timing you're going to hear. While she's on the bus, she decides to do something that she had never done in 13 years, which was to check up on him. So she calls and finds out where he is. In Taylor's own words, he was with the other woman, and he literally dropped me off at the bus and went straight to her. So I asked to take a break. This happened November 28th, 2015. That date is more important than my birth date. It's the day I started living again. By January 2016, I made the decision that I wasn't going back, and my life was way better without him. I had ended it with him probably 5 times in the course of the relationship. 13 years she was with him, by the way. The first time I went and spent the night at my friend's house. The other 4 times I just slept in my car because I was too embarrassed to go to any of my friends or family because I knew I was going to go back. And it's such a mind frackery knowing that you shouldn't, knowing that it's dumb of you, and yet you still do. Because he was 8 hours away, I think that's what made this one stick. He was far enough away that I could get out of the fog, and having that space and that distance allowed me to finally see what my life was like without him. And it was effing good, and it was easy. I used to think that I couldn't maintain the farm without him after he was gone. I realized there were no extra chores. There was less work because I didn't have a man child in the house. And so, yeah, that's basically how we ended up. And not to mention Taylor's healthy weight gain, which rapidly improved the moment she left him. So there's a takeaway there. So, but more to the point, Taylor is giving us something here. First of all, the dates. November 28th. That's practically December. And so by January, when they're supposed to officially put the farm on the market, is when she says, no, I'm keeping the farm. I'm staying here. And I don't want you in my life anymore. So that tells you something that just 1 month She worked through the withdrawals from the abuser and was able to see clearly and choose herself. So that could be a great blueprint for those escaping coercive control. Now, you've got to also understand that it takes complete no contact, because Taylor being 8 hours away from her abuser meant that she didn't have the, shall we say, luxury of having immediate access to her abuser. She was forced to sit with those withdrawals, work through them. And there was something else that Taylor did this time that also helped: experiencing life without her abuser in it and realizing how much better her life was without him. And so that's a third thing the victim can do once they leave and they want to successfully separate. First of all, no contact. No contact, block, avoid, stay away from that abuser because you're going through the withdrawal stage. Make that list, because those high spikes in dopamine are going to trick your brain into only remembering the good times and forgetting all of the abuse. So having that 2-column list where you acknowledge the good times, but also remind yourself of why you left this person, all of the abuses, all of the bad times, and keep it out where you can always see it as a reminder as you're working through these withdrawals. And third, think of all the things you wanted to do while you were with the abuser that you couldn't do, and start doing them. Start living in the freedom and being mindful of how it feels in the moment to be free, doing something you couldn't normally had done had your abuser been in your life. Forged in trauma, rising as warriors.